A few years ago, when I was on one of my recruiting trips, I was sitting on an airplane and I was thinking about my job. And I had a thought process that I shared with, I think, all of you at some point. But it's becoming much more relevant to me personally right now. I decided, sitting on this airplane, writing down my thoughts on an American Airlines napkin that I kept for a while. I don't know where it is now. I decided that I would start sharing my thoughts that I had on this airplane with students wherever I went recruiting, just in case I never saw them again. So at least they could learn something from me. So some of you might remember this if I recruited you. But I'd like to frame everything I'm saying tonight by this thought that, again, some of you have heard before, so I forgive you. Please forgive me for repeating myself. And even if I didn't recruit you, I probably said this in the yeshiva because it's something I believe is, there are times in life where we have thoughts that become central parts of what directs us in life. And what occurred to me was that the period of life that the students that I deal with in my professional life are in is a unique and small percentage of life with high stakes. I realize that as much as when you open a yeshiva, people want to know about the schedule and about the tiulim, and they want to know what your plan is and what your uniqueness is. And then there's that awful question that they want to know, what is your hashkafa? Talk about that too. I think the easier it is for someone to answer the question, the less I trust them. I realized that maybe the most central and important part of what I was doing for a living was helping students, coaching them, dealing with them, talking to them during a period of life when they're trying to figure out who they are. That's what I'm doing every day. Some of it is through the learning. Some of it is through the conversations, walking me home. Some of it is through yelling at them or being yelled at by them. I realized that, and here's again where you've probably heard this from me before, from when you're born till you finish high school, you make almost no major life-changing decisions. Almost none. Even if you make some of you might be thinking, well, I made a decision about which high school to go to, or something like that. If you really think about it, the range of options was quite limited. And your decisions were in a very predetermined context that was not of your making. Occasionally people do make a major life decision at a young age, but it's very rare and usually extremely dysfunctional. That's the first 18 years of life. The definition of success is very clear. Do well in school, stay out of trouble. The definition of failure is very clear. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have people my age, your parents' age, older, who are not too involved in making life-changing decisions on a regular basis. I have not made a major life choice in a long time. I decided where I'm going to live about 12 and a half, 13 years ago. I decided who I'm marrying almost 20 years ago. What role religion plays in my life, what I'm going to do for a living, how I'm going to raise my kids, the big things. I decided them a long time ago, thank God. Been running the program. That's what we hope for. You think about your parents, for the most part, unless usually, unless God forbid something goes horribly wrong, they go through long stretches of time without making any major life-changing decisions. Right? Sometimes it's for a good reason, sometimes for a bad reason, that a change will happen, and a big decision will have to be made, and usually they're one at a time and very rare. It's called life. In between those two sections of life, there is a period of time that lasts different lengths of time for different people, but give or take a decade, late teens to late 20s for most people, in which lots of decisions are being made in rapid succession. Big, 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 big decisions, and they're coming at you all the time. Every year, it's the next year. What am I going to study? What am I going to major in? What am I going to do next? Where am I going this way? Where am I going this way? Am I going to hang out with this crowd or that crowd? It could have big implications. What direction am I taking? Where do I want to live? How do I see myself religiously? Career, location, dating, and it's all happening in the same short period of time. If you think about a lifespan from 0 to Mei B'Esrim, there's this short percentage of it where there's lots and lots of life-changing decisions happening all at once. And I realized, I thought about this while I was sitting on the plane, and I said, wow, in my line of work, what I do for a living is I receive these students just at the beginning of that section of life, of that segment of their lives. That's when I receive the students. That's when I meet them. And what a wonderful minhag it is. What a wonderful minhag it is that North American Jewry and British Jewry has taken upon itself over the last 30, 40 years to go to Israel, to hit pause on all the other things in life, go to Israel, spend time in yeshiva at that point, right at the beginning of that stage of life. And whether you came to Shir every day, or you slept in and bummed around, regardless of how you used the time in terms of limud, and in terms of what we call technical religious growth, every single person in this room in their time in yeshiva did a lot of thinking about these issues that I just mentioned. Lots. That we for sure share. Everyone was thinking about this stuff your whole time when you're in yeshiva. You're still thinking about it, and you're going to be thinking about it for a number of years now. It's going to carry you. You know, this is the sugya you've entered into. This is the part of life you've entered into. Decision-making time. You're all at a certain stage in life. Few people in this room are slight different stage in life. My beloved Talmud Ari, he was in the second year of the yeshiva, and to say we're his closest family is still an understatement. It's still an understatement. And you're like just coming out of that stage of life, right? Things are kind of settled in. But it's still fresh. And what I realized over these years is that self-definition, self-expression, self-knowledge, in the context of Israel and Torah, this is what I'm doing for a living. This is what I do every day. And the way we learn in this yeshiva was critical to that. It was critical to what happened here over these 11 years. The way we learn. I mentioned this Friday night. Not everyone was there. It was critical. The way we learn. The way we don't allow ourselves to fudge it on a word, on a prefix. What does the text say to you? there's an honesty, there's a humility. Everyone who's attended Yesodei Torah has been humbled in shir when they were trying to wiggle through and not be precise. There's a forced honesty here. And that honesty is critical to the development that happens in Yesodei Torah. That happened to every student who walked through these doors. The way we deal with questions, with the big questions of life, of religion, which I say with confidence and perhaps arrogance, and with some sadness, because of all the feedback I've had over this decade from our students who've gone elsewhere and been disappointed. I say that there's a depth and an honesty and a sophistication with which we deal with issues here, whether it's in Ask the Rabbi sessions or in our philosophy curriculum. Rabbi Simkovich once described it as one of the things he loves about this yeshiva is that we're not afraid of ideas. Everywhere you go in the Torah world, right, left, people are afraid of different ideas. There's no fear of ideas in this yeshiva. The Rebbeim do not have the same hashkafas as each other. I sometimes I feel like I don't even have the same hashkafa as myself. If that makes any sense. There's a lack of fear of ideas. And these are things that I'm very proud of and things that we accomplished here. But what's critical to me about this whole thinking about decisions and about defining yourself and about how the big decisions in life become who you are is that now, after all these years of saying this little spiel about decisions, I find myself thrust into one of those rare occurrences that I mentioned for people in my age group going through a major life-changing choice. That's where I am right now. Something that I put every fiber of my being professionally, emotionally into for 12 years, 11 years of operations, 1 year of startup, is closing. And I've been investigating different options of what I'm going to do next. No, I'm not going to announce anything tonight. I'm not at liberty to talk about what I'm involved in right now. When it happens, it happens. And one of the things that's going on is I'm contemplating what exactly am I supposed to be doing? What am I going to do next? And it's bringing me back into that whole self-definition issue that we have in life. So I'd like to share with you tonight my story. Because if I'm going to impart anything to you as we take leave of each other, and I say this also, it's being filmed, it's being recorded. I know that there are alumni who are going to be watching this. This is the final sikha in Yesodei Torah ever. And so I'm speaking not just to the people in the room, but to my students over the years. And to a certain extent, I'm speaking to myself, which I have to honestly say, in my sikhot, specifically, every single sikha I've ever given, I was speaking to myself. That's why I don't write them out fully. Because you can't be passionate about something if you're just repeating. So I'd like to share with you my story. And my fear, I wrote a WhatsApp, I had a little WhatsApp conversation with Rav Khan today where I was like, I'm not sure if I should do this sikha. It's going to sound very self-absorbed and talking about myself. And he was like, no, you should do it. Because I think that in the decisions I've made along the way, I'm talking about decision-making and self-definition. So here, you know, you guys are 18, 19, 20 maybe. I'm 45. I've made a few decisions. I've done some different things in life. Maybe I could share with you my choices and my journey that I've taken up to this point, and share with you some of what motivated me at various points in the journey, some of the things that I learned along the way, and maybe these things could be of help and inspiration to you. Before I start the narrative, I'd like to share with you a little piece of Torah, a thought from Rav Shlomo Wolbe. Rav Wolbe passed away a few years ago, was a giant of the Musar movement, the author of Alei Shur. Musar, Musar means a lot of things. Some people say Musar is just like, telling someone off. People have different definitions of Musar. You read Rav Wolbe, Musar is some combination of philosophy and psychology. That's what it is for Rav Wolbe. But listen to this piece of Torah. And this piece of Torah, I have to say to you, the very first time we ever had a staff meeting, before the yeshiva even opened, when we assembled our first faculty, at the very first faculty meeting, we sat down, and the very first thing we did was I handed out a photocopy of this piece of Torah, and we learned it together as a faculty to set the tone for what this yeshiva is meant to be. Listen carefully. There's one subject in which we have to train ourselves, lamaisa, practically speaking, to be a bar da'as. How do you translate that? To be a thinking person. To be a bar da'as. And that is the matter of asking advice. Minhag ha'olam hu, the general behavior of people is, shemishi yesh lo ezes safek, that anyone who has any doubt, holech miyad lish'ol chaver, he immediately goes and asks a friend, o misha hu gadol mimenu, or he asks someone greater than him, mibli lachshov ba'atzmo ketzad liftor et hasafek, without first thinking to himself, how should I solve this safek? And so too, the same thing is true not just of doubts in life, but in learning. A person has a certain question in learning, he has a difficulty in what he's learning. He immediately starts flipping pages, looking through the Mefarshim. Does anyone deal with my question? Oh, got a question. Oh, who has an answer? A person who behaves this way, la'olam lo yeh bardat. A person such as this will never be a bardas. He'll never be an independently thinking person. V'tamid yeh samuch al shulchan achirim b'inyanav. He will always be dependent on other people for everything. Keitzad ya'aseh adam kasher yesh lo safek. How should a person behave when he has a doubt? Yachshov davka be'atzmo. He should davka think for himself. V'yivarer la'atzmo, kol tzedadei ha'inyan, and clarify for himself all the different sides of the issue. V'achar kach yishkol atzadim b'choved rosh v'yachriya, and then he should weigh the different sides of it with a seriousness and make a decision. Rak kasher hu atzmo higia lamaskana, and only when he himself has reached a conclusion, then you can go talk to other people and say, what do you think of my decision? Do the same thing in your Gemara, and you're learning. First do the work yourself to answer the question. And then only after you've come up with an answer, then you can go look in Svarim and go talk to other people. Notice that Rav Wolbe stresses here, not just that you should think about the different aspects of the issue before you talk to someone. He says you should think about the different aspects of the issue and make a decision, and then go talk to someone. So a critical component of making decisions is trusting yourself. Trusting yourself. And you're never going to trust yourself if you don't trust yourself. If you don't just believe in yourself. If you don't have a sense that you know yourself and you understand the world a certain way. You have to take yourself seriously. There are two types of people in the world. There's people that life is something that happens to them, and there's people that life is something that they do. You want to be in the second group. The way you get there is by being willing to stand up and make choices. Even if you investigate the various sides of the issue, but you're not willing to make a decision, and you ask other people, you're still not trusting yourself. Trust yourself. I grew up as a kid in Montreal. I went to Yeshiva Gedola, which was a black hat yeshiva, a real stark Haredi yeshiva. It wasn't one of these sort of semi-modern American yeshivish places. This was white shirts and black pants. Back then, no yeshiva was white shirts and black pants. Nowadays, it would be a white shirt and black pants. I'm sure that they're wearing white shirts and black pants right now as we speak, in Yeshiva Gedola. But back then, it wasn't like that. Black hat yeshivas, people wore all different color hats back then. That's a different story. But it was a very stark yeshiva, a black hat place, even though my family, my father, Talmud of Soloveitchik, you guys have met my father, and Kedai sent us there. My brothers, various members of my family left the yeshiva at various points when it wasn't for them anymore. One of my brothers actually stayed all the way through. Only one out of the 5 of us did. Everyone started out there, and various points couldn't take it. For me, the breaking point came after 8th grade. I had a strange relationship with the place because it was the learning was a very high level even at a young age. Our final exam in Gemara, final test on a prepare in Gemara in 7th grade was that we had to memorize the Shaklavataria of the first 15 blat, the first 15 dapim, 30 amudim of Masechas Ksubas, which you know about Peh. Seventh grade. This was a serious place. I loved it. I loved the learning. And I still know the first Perek HaKsubas very well, Baruch Hashem, compared to other things I know in Torah, because I did that. A fantastic Rebbe taught us how to learn. But I would get into fights with him. I was a brash kid. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put this little quirk in my, it's either a mutation or that's bad or good depending on the situation, that I've never been afraid to say anything to anybody. Sometimes it's to my benefit. More often than not, it's to my detriment. And I said stuff that got me in trouble. I thought my Rebbe was crazy when he took the Gemara that says Yaakov Avinu lo meis, that Yaakov Avinu is still alive, and he took it literally, said that he's lying there underground in Marsha Machpelah, breathing alive. And I was very chutzpahdik, and I said, what? He must be lonely. What does he eat? And he threw me out of class and suspended me for being chutzpahdik. So I went home, told my father. My father pulled out the Gemara. We learned the Gemara together. We learned the Mefarshim. First thing the Mefarshim say is, of course, this is not meant to be taken literally. So I went back and I was even more chutzpahdik, and I told my Rebbe what my father showed me. And then I got suspended. I got suspended another time for not showing up to school on Yom Ha'atzmaut for davening. I used to come to davening every day, and Yom Ha'atzmaut fell out on either a Monday or a Thursday, which also happened to have been Bahab. So the yeshiva was saying Slichas that day. So he knew that the reason I didn't daven in the yeshiva was because I was davening at my father's shul that morning to say Hallel. That was another fight. So I had my issues with the school. On the other hand, I really loved the learning. I really loved the learning. I was a frustrating kid, both in that school and the school I went to afterwards, Or Chaim in Toronto. I was frustrated. In retrospect, I realized how frustrating I was to my Rebbeim. In that, I always loved learning, really, really enjoyed it. Learning Gemara, a thrill. In Yeshiva Gedola, which was a very high-level learning place, Baruch Hashem, I have to say, I was very successful. But I always hung out with the worst kids. I didn't like to hang out with the other good kids. When I say other, I wasn't a good kid. I was into learning, but I was also into all the misbehavior. So my friends were always like the bummy kids who were on the edge, who weren't really, but in learning, I was always put with the top kids. And there was they once, in Yeshiva Gadol, they didn't want to embarrass all the kids who weren't so good at learning. And they were going to open up a second shiur, and they were going to divide our class into two, have a lower level and a higher level. But they didn't want to call it a lower level and a higher level. So they had this really popular, cool Rebbe that was going to teach the lower level, and they wanted to make it seem like the guys were choosing it. And they knew that all the guys who weren't doing so well were going to choose it. Anyone would have chosen it because he was a really cool young Rebbe, and they were all going to choose it if they just gave it as an option. So before they announced this and told everyone to put up their hands if they want to be with him, the Rebbe first spoke to all the top guys in the shiur and said, "Don't put your hand up." And I was one of them. And I put my hand up anyway. And then I was told I couldn't be in that shiur, and I made a statement, whatever. I was a problematic kid. And I went to Or Chaim in Toronto, which was a great experience. Same thing there, though. I hung out with, a bunch of my best friends in the first year or two of high school got expelled from the school and asked never to come back. So then I ended up having friends who were in public school, and in other schools because my friends all got kicked out. It's kind of funny things. I was a complicated kid, I guess, but I loved the learning. During my years in Or Chaim, I became extremely close with Rabbi David, who's now the rabbi of the shul that I daven in, which is a very unique and beautiful thing in my life, that I have my Rebbe, who was my Gemara Rebbe, who I had a very close personal relationship with since I'm 15 years old, and I'm 45 now, and I see him almost every day. It's a beautiful feature in my life. During my years in Or Chaim, in my second year in Or Chaim was when Rabbi David came. So I was there. We overlapped for 3 years there, and I had a chavrusa with him. We learned Mesilas Yesharim in his office, which was usually about 10 seconds of Mesilas Yesharim, and then like an hour of him complaining to me about the board of the school. We developed a very close personal relationship. And I frustrated him no end by hanging out with all my friends who were getting into trouble. I learned something very important from Rabbi David, which is still true today about him. And I've told it to him. He knows that this is why I view myself as his Talmud. I don't just view myself as his Talmud because of the Torah he taught me and because of the years under which of the relationship. I don't have the same hashkafas as Rabbi David on a lot of issues. And I don't think he would want it any other way. The number one thing I learned from him, and if any of you know him, Rabbi David is a very interesting person. Talk to him about one issue and he'll sound like the most Haredi person in the world. Talk to him about another issue and he'll sound extremely left-wing. He's all over the place. And a lot of people view him as a bundle of contradictions, but he's not a bundle of contradictions at all. He taught me one of the most important principles in my life. And he never said it explicitly, I just saw it. Which is, and I want to share this with you, don't buy in to the bundling together of hashkafas. Do you guys know what I mean by that? Where people who believe this on this issue also believe this on this issue, and this on this issue, and this on this issue. So it all goes together. Why? Why do that? Every issue should be evaluated on its own merits. And if you end up sounding like a right-winger on this issue and like a left-winger on this issue, so what? So everyone will hate you? For something? Big deal. Every issue should be evaluated honestly on its own merits. And to me, it's one of the most important and honest principles that I ever learned. And I took it with me. I took it very seriously. Rabbi David taught us to think for ourselves. He taught us to analyze things, think about it honestly, and most importantly, one of Rabbi David's best traits, which also gets him into trouble, is he's not afraid of anybody. There's people that he probably would be better for him professionally if he was afraid of them, but he's not afraid of them. Lo taguru mipnei ish is a rule he lives by. And he taught us to that throughout. We saw his behavior, we saw the way he talked about things. Not afraid to take a stand if he believes that it's correct. Ish emet. It was something I always wanted to emulate. After high school, I went to Keren B'Yavneh, and developed a close relationship with Rameir Goldwachter, had a very big impact on me. I mentioned the story on Shabbos. I won't tell it again. A lot of guys have heard it. He answered a lot of my questions without answering them. But mostly I was taken in by his tremendous love for every single person he meets. And it's really sincere. At first you think it's crazy. Can't wipe the smile off his face. He's always happy. But then you get to know him and you realize he really honestly loves every person he meets. It's an astounding thing. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life during these years. I wasn't the kid who was driven, who knew what he wanted to do. I do have this one strange memory from being, before I left Yeshiva Gedola, being in 7th or 8th grade, and sitting in my room downstairs, and I lived in the basement in our house in Montreal, and preparing for a Gemara test, and saying to myself, I'd love to be a Rosh Yeshiva one day. And I remember thinking about it. I remember telling my mom that I'd love to be a Rosh Yeshiva one day, and she was like, oh, okay. My parents, their attitude was always like, you can do whatever you want. My parents never put any pressure on me to do this or that. And I quickly forgot it. I went, especially when I got to Toronto, I became friends with all kinds of people. As always, I gravitated towards as I mentioned, towards the kids who were always getting into trouble. And the same thing was true when I was in KBY. Again, I was learning. I loved learning. I was putting a pretty high shear. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no career aspirations. I had no plan. I kind of knew that the things I was good at weren't very marketable. Like I was good at making friends. What do you do with that? And I liked talking a lot. Liked arguing. These weren't exactly things that I was gonna move anywhere with. I mean, I was student council president in high school. People always told me I had good leadership skills. I didn't know what I was gonna, but honestly, I had no clue what I was gonna do. I just wanted to have a good time with my friends, and I loved learning. I came back to Toronto. My parents would have rather I had stayed in Israel. My parents were already in Israel. They made Aliyah while I was in high school. But I wanted to go back to Toronto because I had this girlfriend who I barely have memories of, but at the time it was very important to me that I go back to Toronto because I had this girlfriend there, who I broke up with shortly after I got back to Toronto. I have no idea where she is today. It was not a smart decision at the time, but I certainly wouldn't be where I am right now if I had not gone back to Toronto. I went back to Toronto. I moved in with a couple friends who I'm still very close friends with today, my roommates, who stayed one of them stayed my roommate throughout my years of college. I went to York University. I had a chavrusa every morning before school with Rabbi Benji Jacoby, who was a rabbi who was doing a lot of kiruv on campuses in Canada and in Toronto. He would visit campuses all over the country. And he was very involved with Jewish students. He still lives in Toronto. He lives on Coldstream, those of you who are from Toronto, near the Kollel. And we learned in this Beis Medrash in Toronto every morning. I think people thought he was being makar of me because I would walk in there with my ripped jeans and my t-shirts, and my hair was getting kind of long. And I'd sit down with him in this Haredi Kollel, and we'd pull out a Gemara Shabbos, and we learned. And then we learned, I think we learned Klal Gadol together, some other things. We're just learning the Chavrusa, and then I would go to school. And at York University, I majored in English literature because I had no idea what I wanted to do, and English literature was fun. And I would hang out with my friends. But because I was majoring in English literature, which Orthodox Jews don't usually major in, Orthodox Jews usually major in things like business and accounting. And if they don't know what they're going to do, so they major in psychology. Jews don't major in English literature. English literature was filled with all sorts of eclectic people, mostly non-Jewish people. So naturally, they became my friends, and that's who I started hanging out with. So of course, all the people around me in the community were worried that I'm going off the derech because I'm hanging out with these non-Jews. But I promise you, there was nothing ever furthest thing from my mind. I loved learning. I loved Torah, I loved Judaism. I just didn't like dressing the part, and I didn't mind hanging out with other people, and I was always very confident in myself and never worried that they would influence me. And while it might be very true that a lot of people are very strongly influenced by people that they hang out with, maybe it's because I'm so arrogant in my personality, maybe it's because I'm so brash, I never had that fear and it didn't happen. I hung out with these people, I learned a lot from them, they were fascinating people. But I really, again, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I always bristled when people asked me, what do you plan to do with that English degree? Why are you studying English? What are you going to do with that? So I had this cute, snarky response that I would say, well, I'm just studying it because I enjoy it, which sounds like a cool and idealistic thing to say, but it was really masking the fact that I had no clue what I was going to do, and I was afraid to say that. And I was an NCSY advisor also during those years. They'd always put me with the roughest kids. That was who I hung out with best. During those years, though, I got involved with a group of students called the Jewish Students Network. The Jewish Students Network was a group of students on college campuses in Canada during that time. It doesn't exist anymore, who were activists. When I say activists, it means that they would look for ways to do Israel advocacy or activism against, speaking out against things that are anti-Semitic. Some of them were religious, a lot of them weren't. And I met some of them on campus, and a couple of them asked me to get involved because I was majoring in English literature, and I was in the creative writing section of the English Lit department. They asked me to edit the magazine, and I got involved in this group. And I'd never really thought about activism or Israel advocacy or anything like that, but why not get involved in something? And it was around that time that I realized that all these years hanging out with the wrong kids and hanging out with my non-Jewish friends, I found myself, and also not dressing the part of someone too frum, I found myself in a position that when I was talking to these students, my fellow students who were involved in this group, I was really able to talk to them, and they felt comfortable with me. I sensed it. I realized it. I started becoming very close with them. And without me ever trying to do kiru, I don't even know what that is either, almost all the people I hung out with during those years became observant. And it was only in later years that a number of them had the kind of maturity and honesty to say to me that I was the reason that they made those decisions, a number of them. And that kind of built up my ego a bit, but I also realized that there was something that I could contribute in terms of my ability to connect with people. But during that time, maybe the most important thing that happened to me was I had this very strange job during a couple of the last years I had in college, that I worked in a funeral home, spending all of Shabbos in the funeral home saying Tehillim, doing shmirah on the dead bodies. Benjamin's funeral home in Steeles. So I would walk into the funeral, I would have to be at the funeral home when they were closing on Friday afternoon. They'd lock me inside, put on the alarm, and then when they came Motzei Shabbos to wash the bodies and prepare them for the Sunday funerals, they would unlock the door and let me out. And I spent the entire Shabbos saying Tehillim. I would go through Sefer Tehillim about 4 times over the course of a Shabbos. Take very short naps in between, but I was a shomer. That's what I did, a very odd job. And I did it for a long time, every single Shabbos. I didn't hear laning, didn't daven with a minyan for Shabbos for a long time, but I was pumped because I was involved in this mitzvah. Very weird job I had, mess with your head, dealing with dead bodies on a regular basis. But during that time, I did a lot of thinking about my life, because this may surprise you, but if you think about your life, there's probably rarely ever been a time that you spent 24 hours straight not having any contact, not even visual contact, at all with any other human being, and that you were not asleep for a big chunk of it. It's actually quite rare. To actually spend 24 hours by yourself, mostly awake, with zero contact with any other human being. Who's alive. And even if you've done that, you've probably done it very rarely. I did it every week. So it became this kind of meditation, because I'd be sitting there saying Tehillim, the whole Shabbos by myself, and I found myself picking up thoughts that I had been thinking about the previous week and hadn't thought about in between, and then I'd sit down and start saying Tehillim, and I'd get back into the sugya of what I was thinking about. And I worked through a lot of things. And during that time, there were two books that I was reading simultaneously. One of them was a book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which some of you might have heard of, by Robert Pirsig. Anyone ever heard of that book? It's a novel. It's an outstanding book. It's an outstanding, outstanding book. I read that book because I was defiant. Someone had told me it was a great book, and they lent it to me. And on the back of the book, it said, "This book will change the way you think about your life." And I was like, "Yeah, right. This book will change the way you think about your life." And it changed the way I think about my life. So I was reading that book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, by Robert Pirsig, which I highly, highly recommend. But simultaneously, during that same time, I was also reading this book, Doctor and the Soul, by Viktor Frankl, which I've quoted before. I quoted it in the Sikha I gave about suffering. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance is a book about these people. It's a novel, but it's a philosophical novel. It's actually about some big ideas in life that are presented through a storyline. And in the storyline, there are these couples that go on this long journey together on their motorcycles, and the maintaining of the motorcycle for one of them is just it's this distraction and this chore which he doesn't like dealing with. And the other guy, who's the narrator of the book, actually finds it an end in and of itself. He enjoys the actual maintenance of the motorcycle. He doesn't see the maintenance of the motorcycle merely as a means towards having a working motorcycle. He views it as an end in and of itself. That's one aspect of what goes on in the book. There's a lot more in there. It's worth reading. And around the same time, I was reading Doctor and the Soul, and Viktor Frankl writes the following thing. He said, "I have said that man should not ask what he may expect from life, but should rather understand that life expects something from him. It may also be put this way. In the last resort, man should not ask what is the meaning of my life, but should realize that he himself is being questioned. Life is putting its problems to him, and it's up to him to respond to these questions by being responsible. He can only answer to life by answering for his life. Life is a task. The religious man differs from the apparently irreligious man only by experiencing his existence not simply as a task, but a mission. This means that the religious man is also aware of the taskmaster, the source of his mission. Responsibility and freedom comprise the spiritual domain of man. What a beautiful statement. Responsibility and freedom. And I was reading both books at the same time. And it occurred to me that I have to start taking my life very seriously. What does life demand from me? Viktor Frankl saying to me that life asks me, what does life expect from me? And I'm reading this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is telling me that if you really want to get quality out of life, if you really want to do things to their highest level, you have to care about them. You have to care about things that are means as ends in and of themselves. And then I'm reading Pirkei Avos one Shabbos afternoon in the funeral home. I brought Pirkei Avos with me with the commentary of Rav Ruvain Bulka from Ottawa. He wrote a commentary on Pirkei Avos. And on the Mishnah right near the beginning that says, Al tiyu ka'avadim hameshamshin es harav al manas l'kabel pras. Don't be like servants who are serving the master in order to receive reward, but be like servants who are serving the master not to receive reward. And he writes in his commentary on that Mishnah, he says, this Mishnah is telling us that the value of living according to a value is the value itself. And all of this converged in my mind, and I said to myself, I have to start asking myself this question. I have to start taking my life seriously and saying, what can I do to contribute? What is my responsibility? I have the freedom to choose that. What is my responsibility? And to treat it not as a means to get something else, but to treat whatever I do as an end in and of itself. And that way I'll do it at the highest level. That's how I have to view my life. And from that point forward, my motivation in life has been the same. In everything that I've done, my motivation has been exactly the same. And I fear, and this is why I said I fear giving the siha. I fear that I'm going to sound like I'm aggrandizing myself, but I have to tell you, it's honestly what goes into every major decision I've made ever since that week or so where I was reading these books. I remember exactly where I was when I read these words in The Doctor and the Soul. I remember where I was sitting. I remember reading them and looking up and thinking about my life. When I think about the narrative of my life, things begin then. And I said to myself, I have to think about what I can contribute to the Jewish people and to the world that is unique, and that's me, and that other people wouldn't be doing, and then that's what I have to do. And that's what I have to do in life. I have to always look at the world and say, what can I be doing? What is my responsibility now? Around that time, I met Rabbi Avi Weiss, who's very famous now for being the founder and head. He's retiring of the Yeshivat Chovevei Torah in New York. But this is long before that. The main thing he was known for back then was a lot of political activism. He did a lot of important stuff. He was one of the leaders of the Freedom for Soviet Jewry movement, and trying to raise awareness about Jonathan Pollard and some other, fighting against the Nation of Islam, anti-Semitism in America, lots of things he was involved in. And he really believed in activism, still does. Bumped him in the airport not long ago. And he's a rabbi in Riverdale. Again, he's mostly now known for being very at the left-wing edge of orthodoxy. But he came to Toronto. We invited him to the Jewish Students Network, and I interviewed him for our magazine. And we got to know each other a little bit. And he asked me to come to New York and work for him, being a full-time political activist. And I did. I left Toronto, went down to New York, and started becoming a professional protester and organizer of rallies and writing articles and just being a political activist. And I remember there's one story I'll tell you about him that's unbelievable. We had done a campaign trying to get people to realize, especially as Jews, that they should not be voting for David Dinkins. David Dinkins was the mayor of New York before Rudy Giuliani. You guys have heard of Rudy Giuliani? He was the mayor of New York, great mayor of New York. He was the mayor of New York when 9/11 happened, mayor of New York for a long time. Before Rudy Giuliani was mayor of New York, there was a guy named David Dinkins. When David Dinkins was mayor of New York, there were these riots that took place in Crown Heights, where there was an accident where this African-American kid had been hit by a car being driven by a Jew, and the blacks in the neighborhood rioted, and it was mamash like a pogrom, what they did there in Crown Heights back in the early 90s. And it was known, there was recordings of it, and everyone knew about the instructions given that David Dinkins, the mayor of New York, who himself is African-American, had given instructions to the cops to lay off of Crown Heights and let them riot for a while so that they could vent their frustration. And during those hours where he had told the cops to lay off of Crown Heights, a Jew by the name of Yanko Rosenbaum was killed, and it was a terrible scandal. And we had a campaign that people shouldn't vote for him because he's lost his privilege of being mayor, the way he handled Crown Heights. It was a big issue, and the Jewish establishment wasn't really doing anything about it because he was a Democrat, and most Jewish establishments are Democrats. But we ran this campaign. We had rallies everywhere, and we did a great job. We were in the papers every day, and everywhere he spoke, we were protesting. Rudy Giuliani won the election. It was the first time he became mayor of New York. That was what launched him into the fame. And we're sitting in the office a couple days after the election, and the phone rings. And it's one of the people from Rudy Giuliani's office calling. And he wants to invite Rabbi Weiss to sit on the dais, sit up on the stage at the inauguration, when he gets inaugurated as mayor of New York. He wants him to be sitting up there because he did so much for the campaign to help him. And he also wants to invite him to like a cocktail party after the inauguration. So I answer the phone, I cover the receiver, and I say to Rabbi, I say, Avi, I tell him what's going on, and I was like, this is great. He goes, hang up the phone, tell him we'll call him back. Okay, I hang up the phone. And Avi says to me, he says, Pesach, we can't do it. I can't sit up on that dais. I said, why not? I said, you did so much. The Jewish establishment did nothing. Now they're all going to be cozying up to him, and you actually went out there and you spoke and you said what was right. This is vindication. This is what we work for. And he said, no, it's not. He said, you don't understand. He said, first of all, I don't know what kind of mayor Rudy Giuliani is going to be. I might have to protest against something he does. I don't know what he's going to do. And if I sit up on that dais and I go to that cocktail party and I shake hands with him and I take pictures with him, it's going to be harder for me to speak out against him if he does anything that I have to speak out against. That's number one. He said, number two, if I'm sitting up on the dais and the Jewish establishment feels a little bit slighted because this activist, Rabbi Weiss, is up on the dais and they have a less prominent position, or they view that I'm now moving into their territory where they want to be the ones who have the relationship with him, he says, I don't want to do that. I want them to have a good relationship with him because they are the ones who he has to deal with, and they are the ones who make decisions for the community. We're not going up there. I'm not going to the cocktail party, and I'm not sitting on the dais. Didn't accept the covenant. No one ever knew about this. I learned a very big lesson that day. That was the day. I don't even know if Avi remembers this story, because this stuff happened every day with him. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but I got to tell you, the man's a tzaddik. I know him very, very well. And I learned a big lesson that day. I learned that it's not about you. You're an Eved Hashem. You're doing what's right. Eved Hashem means you're doing what's right in the world. You're doing what's right in the world because it's the right thing to do. And your only calculation has to be, does this make me more in a position to do what's right or less in a position to do what's right? If going and sitting up there will compromise my position and my ability to do what's right, then we don't do it. I moved on. I worked for Avi for a little more than a year, but I really wanted to make Aliyah. I moved to Israel, and I became the executive director of the International Coalition for Missing Israeli Soldiers. Immediately upon arriving in Israel, they wanted to hire me. And I worked with the families of Israeli MIAs to raise awareness about their plight and to put pressure on the Israeli government. That was, at the time, the Israeli government had just started their negotiations with the PLO, with Yasser Arafat, at the beginning of what's called Oslo, the peace process. We wanted to make sure that any information and more about the missing Israeli soldiers would be part of the negotiations. We were putting a lot of pressure on them and pressure on the Americans. We ran all kinds of campaigns. They did a lot of lobbying in Washington during that time and in the Knesset and rallies and all sorts of public things. Met some interesting people along the way, like Al Gore and Henry Kissinger and some other famous people. But again, it was always, I never forgot that story with Avi. That always keep your focus. Focus is on doing what's right and raising awareness and moving things to a position that they get dealt with. Because an activist can't solve problems. People in power solve problems. An activist, your goal is to create a situation where the problems get solved by the people who need to solve them. But at some point in this process, so I did this for a little more than a year, working with the missing Israeli soldier families. And then I said to myself, you know what? If I'm really going to be involved in leadership in the Jewish people, I should learn for smicha. Because this whole time I was learning. I always had a chavrus every day. I'd find a local base medrash. I'd have someone to learn with. I should really learn for smicha. I should really be a rabbi. Rabbis should be the leaders of the Jewish people. And if I'm going to be involved in leadership, I should be a rabbi. So I found a base medrash and I went to Chappelle's. I wasn't a student there. I just needed a base medrash to learn in, and I negotiated my way in the door and convinced them to let me stay. A whole funny story there. But I ended up learning in the base medrash in Chappelle's for 3 years. Much of that time, my chavrusa was Rav Khan. Not right at the beginning, but we met about 10 months after I started learning there. We started learning together. And there I saw a style of learning that was beautiful, that was open-minded, and that taught people really how to learn on their own as a hashkafa. And when you give people independence, they can develop into who they really are in Torah. And I fell in love with it. And I wasn't sure yet exactly what my task in Am Yisrael was going to be. When I finished learning for Smicha, I said, you know what? I think I still have what to contribute in Chutz La'aretz. I always had a good way of talking with people who were not observant or not Jewish. I always got along well with them. During my years working for the missing Israeli soldiers, I got to know a lot of Christian Zionists. I always felt very comfortable with them. I said, I'm going to go to the States, be a rabbi there. So I got hired by a shul in Newport News, Virginia. Didn't enjoy being a pulpit rabbi so much, although I did enjoy teaching classes. I taught a lot of classes there to adults. But what was missing for me in that job was I wasn't working with young people. Because I was a rabbi of a shul, mostly an elderly shul. So I then changed jobs, moved to Connecticut, moved to Fairfield, Connecticut, where I became a teacher in a middle school. And I ran an outreach program for young families. And I did that for 3 years, and I enjoyed it, and I learned how to teach. And it was during that time that I got an email from Rav Khan asking me if I wanted to open a yeshiva. Rav Khan read a piece of this email to you guys, but he read an email at the Alumni Shabbaton in New York. He read an email that I wrote him that made me cry. I don't cry that often. I literally started crying at the Oneg in New York when he read this email, because I didn't remember this email at all. And it was like hearing me as a 31-year-old talk to me now. Here's what I wrote in January of 2001. Reb Scott, how are things in the Aretz? Did you ever get the check in the Emes Liyaakov? I don't know what that's about. What do you mean exactly by the suggestion that we open a yeshiva? What niche do you believe we could fill that's not spoken for? It's certainly something I'd love to do if feasible. Life in Connecticut is, well, snowy lately. Actually, things are quite good other than not being in Israel. You know, that trip I took last March, I had come to Israel the previous March for like a week. I'm sorry we only saw each other briefly at Dar Chainom, that's Chappelle's. It was very tough emotionally. I cried literally a lot. I almost ripped up my return ticket and sent word for Kate and the kids to come. I'm torn by a dilemma. I do not want to return to Israel if it means lessening my overall contribution to Klal Yisrael. On the other hand, I desperately want to come back. I have no Yetzer Hara to stay in the U.S. I just want to make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. The problem is that I can't ask the one person who I usually ask for advice, my dad, because he has an obvious personal vested interest in my return to Israel as soon as possible. Your thoughts on this matter would be greatly appreciated. Pesach. And he wrote me a long response that dealt with a lot of what we would do if we opened a yeshiva. At the end of his response, he writes as follows. Regarding your future plans, I must say that I also feel like a Nogea Badavar. Eliza and I miss you guys very much, and I would be thrilled if you came back, specifically to Ramat Beit Shemesh. But in any case, I really can't judge for you how much you are accomplishing in Chutz La'aretz. Are you doing things that no one else could do? Is it something that can only be done in America rather than in Israel? I was told by 1 million people before I started teaching that I would have a rough time getting a job. Everyone in Israel can teach, so why hire me? This attitude implies that there is much more to be done in Chutz La'aretz than here. But thank God I applied for and received the Reshit job, which was what I wanted, without too much trouble. I think there's a big difference between the thousands who are in Kollel and have been in Kollel for 15 years who want to teach, and guys like you and me. Although their knowledge of Torah is likely much broader, their ability to teach and relate to 18-year-olds who care more about the Yankees and Britney Spears than they do about Masachet Baba Kama is pretty limited. I'm pretty sure I received the Reshit job as much because I had a different resume and because they liked my practice year. So it's true, there are thousands here who can teach, or at least have the knowledge to teach. But to really affect a person, he should be able to relate to you on a personal level. That's something that you can give, which is not necessarily so common here in Israel. Unfortunately, a lot needs to be done in Eretz Yisrael too. From what I see in these kids, I believe that you would be able to really be a hero to some of them. It was this email that made me decide to do it. That made me change course and realize, okay, maybe I shouldn't be in Connecticut. Maybe I should come to Israel. Maybe I have what to contribute. So we embarked on this project. I'm going to cut to the chase. And we opened this yeshiva. I don't have to tell you about this yeshiva. You know all about it. And now it's this email was 2001. It's now 2015. And things have changed in the world of post-high school yeshivas and what kids are looking for. And it's time to move on. For whatever reasons it is, it's time to move on. So now I'm not back to anywhere. I'm where I've always been. And I have to decide what's next. And what that means, which is what it meant for me in that email in 2001, and it's what it meant to me that day that I first picked up this book. It's what it meant to me when I got on the plane to go to Israel to work for the missing Israeli soldiers. I'm in the same place. I have to figure out what I can do that Am Yisrael needs. Am Yisrael has a lot of needs right now. Am Yisrael is always confused in different ways, in different times. Look at the Torah, look at Tanakh. Those of you who are in B'kiyas Shir, look at what we were reading in Sota today about the deterioration in society. One thing is consistent about Am Yisrael. If you dropped yourself down in any particular moment in Klal Yisrael's history and just looked around, you'd say, we're doomed. And weiter. 2,000 years later. Oh, terrible. We're doomed. There's no way out of this mess. But we have needs. There's things that I care deeply about. There's things that I'm passionate about. Some of them pull me to the right. Some of them pull me to the left. I get pulled, you know. But what I learned from my teachers, what I learned from Rabbi David about evaluating things honestly, what I learned from Avi Weiss, it's not about you. It's about doing what you have to do at that time. What I learned from Viktor Frankl is about responsibility. It's about answering that question, what is life asking of you? What is life demanding of you? These are the things that, after having a very nice 12 years of not having to contemplate these things because a decision was made and I was going with it, I'm put back into thinking about these things every day. And I don't know what the decision is going to be. I know that I have to take in, again, what my teachers taught me. I have to not be afraid of people. I have to fear only Hashem. I have to trust, going back to the first thing I said, what Rav Welby said, I have to trust myself. I have to trust my take on things. And that my read of the situation, which is my read of the situation, is accurate. I have to trust that and be willing to make a decision based on that. These are all things I wanted to share with you. It's what I'm going through now. It's very personal, but it's also, I think, things that you could learn from. You're embarking on your journeys in life. And you have a lot of decisions ahead of you. And if Yesodei Torah stands for one thing, it stands for this idea. The Mesilas Yesharim says at the beginning, in the opening words of Mesilas Yesharim that I learned with Rabbi David many years ago, Yesod HaChasidus V'Shoresh HaAvodah. The basis, the foundation of piety, and the root of all labor. Ushe Yivada V'Yitamet. Etzel Kol Adam. What? Yitamet Etzel Adam. It should become, I haven't looked at it in years, to say, that it should become verified for a person, Ma chovato what's the next word? Be'olamo. What is his obligation? Be'olamo. It doesn't say ba'olam. Ma chovato be'olamo. Everyone has their own world. What is your obligation in your world? What is my obligation in my world? You're allowed to have your own olam. If we stand for anything, it's that we have to understand that every person is different. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it that way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be different. If he didn't, he wouldn't have made us different. We each have different traits, we have different strengths, and we're each put into a particular time period, a particular context, and we have a task. That's who we are. We're not looking to be the same. We're looking, Davka, to be ourselves. I'm looking for that now too. My journey in life that started when I read this book. Halavai was some holy Jewish book. I have to tell you, this is the book that changed me. Doctor in the Soul. And I'm in the next stage of it now. We have to ask ourselves, everyone has to ask themselves, all right, what do I believe in? What do I care about? What do I want? How do I understand things? What's right? What's wrong? Don't think about the externals. Don't think about the labels. Don't think about who's going to criticize you for what you believe and who's going to love you for what you believe. That's not what it's about. What does the world need from me? What does life need from me? What does Am Yisrael need from me? What does God need from me? From me. And with that, we move forward. We'll end with this. This is really the end. In this week's parasha, got to talk about the parasha. We have Birchas Kohanim. Yevarecha Hashem Yishmerecha Yer Hashem Panav Elecha V'chuneka Yisa Hashem Panav Elecha V'yasem L'chashem. The Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar says that his way of understanding these three psukim is based on a very peculiar medrash. The medrash says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu first viewed us as a daughter. He then viewed us as a spouse, and he then viewed us as a mother. He says, what does this mean? He says the initial stage of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with us was that he was like the mother and we're like the daughter. He's protecting us. Yevarechacha Hashem, God will bless you, v'yishmerecha, and he'll guard you. Because Baruch Hu, he's taking care of us. And then, next stage, Ya'er Hashem panav elecha. Hashem will shine his face at you, implying some kind of equal footing. He's facing us on equal ground, that we're partners in this. We have to do what we have to do, he's going to do what he's going to do, but Hashem views us as a partner, that he shares the task of fixing the world with us. But that ultimately, says the Kli Yakar, he looks at us like a mother. Yisa Hashem panav, which literally means he will raise his face up to you. Yisa Hashem panav elecha. You only raise your face up to look at someone who's above you. That ultimately Hashem depends on us. In the later stage, at the end game of the covenant with Hashem, he looks to us. He looks to us. And says, come on, help me out here. Hashem wants us to do it. He wants us to complete the job. That's what he dreamed about. What did Hashem want? Hashem wanted a world in which willful beings emulate him and believe in him and recognize him and bring everything that is good into the world, and they do it. Yeah, you can do Makkas and Yetzias Mitzrayim again. That's no chachma. But in the end of the day, what Hashem really wants is he wants us to take the reins. So says the Kli Yakar, he looks to us like a child looks to a parent. He needs us to take over. We have to know that we have responsibilities in the world. Each and every one of us. That doesn't mean everyone should become an activist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in your choices, where to live, who to marry, how you live your life, how you raise your kids, how you give your tzedakah, Mir Hashem, when you're successful. Whatever it is you do, your life has to be motivated by the question, what does life want from me? What is my responsibility on this earth? What role can I play? I'm saying good night, I'm saying good Shabbos, but it's really a lot more than that at this point. This is the last Mishmar, the last Sikha. It's the closing of the curtain on a very important chapter in the lives, in my life, in Rav Khan's life, in the lives of our staff, in the lives of everyone who walked through these doors. A big part of our identity as Jews, as Orthodox Jews, as frum guys, of every Jew, is what yeshiva they went to. And your yeshiva is closing. It's a strange thing, you know. There's guys in my shul who are in their 50s who are Shalvin guys. You know, their yeshiva's still there. It's my yeshiva. Think about your parents who went to yeshiva. They identify with the yeshiva they went to. You're Yesodi guys. Yesodi guys. You went to Yesodi. What's that? We were open for the whole 11 years people were asking, what's that? But what it means, remember what it means. What it means is that you're a bardas. Is that you were taught, what does it say? What's an honest answer? That there could be multiple answers to a question. And that sometimes we have to realize that Judaism and Torah is not an answer. It's just a better question.